I never imagined that my life would take a turn like this. The conference room was buzzing with nervous anticipation. Every executive in the company, every department head, every senior manager, all dressed in tailored suits, their faces set with ambition, had gathered for what everyone knew would be a historic announcement. The board of directors had flown in, the legal team was present, and there was a subtle electricity in the air. Today, the future of the company would be revealed the next CEO. I sat in the back row, nearly invisible, pressed against the wall with the other lower-level staff who had been invited only for the sake of ceremony. My title, executive assistant, hardly fit the grandeur of the occasion. I wasn't anyone important. My job was usually to print agendas, schedule meetings, and make sure the coffee was strong enough to keep Mr. Spears, our formidable CEO, from snapping at anyone before noon. Still, I felt a strange flutter in my chest as the company lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. The room hushed instantly, hundreds of eyes fixed on him. "This is the official announcement of Mr. Theodore Spears' chosen successor," he began. His voice carried a weight that made my palms sweat. For weeks, speculation had run rampant. Some bet it would be Anthony Miles, the calculating CFO with 20 years of service. Others whispered about Rachel Green, the head of global strategy, whose polished speeches and ruthless efficiency had made her a favorite among the board. I had heard these discussions in the cafeteria, in hallways, even while waiting for the elevator. Everyone had their theory, but one thing was certain: the next CEO would come from the upper echelons of power. The lawyer paused, scanning the document in his hands. He looked nervous, as if he knew the name he was about to say would ignite a firestorm. "The successor, as appointed by Mr. Spears himself, will be..." Time slowed. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Miss Julia Reynolds." For a split second, the words didn't register. The name felt like it belonged to someone else. My name, spoken into that cavernous room, sounded foreign, as though it had been plucked from a different universe and dropped here by mistake. Every head turned toward me. Faces I had only seen from a distance, executives who never bothered to learn my name, now stared in disbelief. I felt the weight of their shock pressing against me. My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. Me. The room erupted in murmurs. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. Others frowned, their expressions darkening with anger. I could feel the sharp edge of their judgment slicing through me. Who was I to sit among them, much less stand at the helm of this corporation? The lawyer's voice cut through the chaos, steady but firm. "Mr. Spears' decision is final. Documentation has been provided and will be shared." And just like that, the world I thought I knew shattered. I wasn't just Julia Reynolds, the quiet assistant who refilled coffee cups and took dictation. I was apparently the heir to the empire everyone else in this room had spent years, even decades, clawing their way toward. I had no idea what was happening or why my name had been chosen. All I knew was that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. To understand how I ended up in that boardroom with my name on everyone's lips, you have to rewind several months. Back then, I was nobody, just another 20-something trying to carve out a place in a city where ambition seemed to be the air everyone breathed. I hadn't even applied to work directly under Theodore Spears, the legendary and notoriously difficult CEO of the company. My resume had been submitted to Human Resources for a pool of administrative openings. I imagined I'd be assigned to a mid-level manager, someone with predictable hours and a manageable workload. Instead, one Monday morning, I received a curt email report to the CEO's office at 8:00 a.m. sharp. My stomach sank. I had heard the stories. Everyone had. Spears wasn't just demanding, he was merciless. His turnover rate for assistants was practically folklore. 6 people in 4 months. Each one left broken, burned out, or unceremoniously fired. I told myself I'd survive at least a few weeks, maybe long enough to pay off some bills. After all, the salary was almost double what I'd expected. That first morning, I walked into the executive suite like someone marching toward an execution. The atmosphere was intimidating: polished mahogany walls, muted artwork worth more than my annual rent, and the constant click of expensive shoes on marble floors. The staff avoided eye contact, moving quickly, as though afraid their boss might catch them loitering. When I finally met Spears, I understood why. He was tall, silver-haired, with sharp eyes that seemed to slice right through you. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're late," he said, glancing at the clock. It was 7:58. I thought I was early," I stammered. "Early is late. Punctual is barely acceptable. Learn the difference." That was my welcome. From then on, every day was a test. He scrutinized every email draft, every calendar entry, even the tone of my phone calls. "Don't sound cheerful," he'd bark. "Sound competent." If a report was delivered 30 seconds later than expected, he made sure I knew it. If a document wasn't formatted exactly to his liking, he tore it apart with red ink. At first, I resented him. I told myself I was just a pawn, a disposable stand-in, until he chewed me up and spit me out like the others. My friends urged me to quit to find something saner. But there was something about him beneath all the severity that kept me curious. Maybe it was the way he lingered late at night in his office, when everyone else had gone home, staring at old photographs on his desk. Or the fleeting softness in his voice when he spoke about the company's early years before it became a global powerhouse. Meanwhile, the rest of the organization treated him like a throne waiting to be vacated. Department heads circled like hawks, each one hungry for a shot at succession. No one cared about Spears, the man they only saw Spears the seat of power. I was the only one too far down the ladder to scheme. My job was survival, to show up, to work hard, to avoid mistakes. And yet, in ways I didn't understand at the time, those simple choices were already setting me apart. If someone had told me then that this relentless old man would one day trust me with everything he had built, I would have laughed in their face. But fate has a way of unfolding in the least expected places, sometimes in the very shadow of someone everyone else had already given up on. If working for Theodore Spears had been a game, it would have been one rigged for me to lose. Every day presented a new test, a new opportunity for him to expose my flaws. He micromanaged everything from the spacing of bullet points in a presentation to the exact tone I used when confirming his lunch reservations. Precision, he would say, tapping the edge of his desk with a gnarled finger, is the difference between leaders and amateurs. The pressure was relentless. I started waking up at 4 a.m, running through my to-do lists twice before sunrise, double-checking every detail until my eyes blurred. My body lived in a state of constant tension. My stomach knotted, my shoulders aching. I was exhausted, but walking away wasn't an option, not with the paycheck, not with the stubborn streak in me that refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me quit. What made it worse was the culture around me. My colleagues, those who orbited closer to power, saw Mr. Spears as nothing more than an obstacle between them and the CEO's chair. They smiled to his face, but the moment his back was turned, they whispered, plotted, and sharpened their knives. I caught fragments of their conversations in the break room, saw the smug glances they exchanged when one of his demands sent me scrambling. To them, I wasn't a peer. I was collateral damage, the next inevitable casualty of his impossible standards. But I couldn't bring myself to hate him the way they did. Yes, he was brutal, but beneath the sharp edges, I sensed something else. An old loneliness he never admitted, a suspicion that everyone around him wanted his power, but not his company. When he barked orders, I obeyed. When he criticized, I took notes. And when he sighed late at night, rubbing his temples, after another 14-hour day, I quietly placed a cup of tea on his desk, not asking for thanks. It didn't mean I wasn't suffering. I went home most nights too drained to cook, surviving on takeout and collapsing into bed. My friends stopped inviting me out. I was always too busy. The job consumed me, and I felt myself disappearing into it. And yet, through the exhaustion, I tried to hold on to one thing, my humanity. I refused to become cynical. If he snapped, I didn't snap back. If he insulted me, I didn't retaliate. Instead, I answered with respect, even if my voice shook. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't ambition. It was just who I was. And slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice something began to shift. His glares softened into glances. His scoldings turned into corrections, then into curt nods of approval. He still never praised me outright, but he stopped hovering over every task, as if begrudgingly he was starting to trust me. Meanwhile, the hawks outside his office grew hungrier. The CFO, the strategy chief, the board, they all saw Spears' age, his slowing gait, his moments of fatigue, and they waited for their chance to swoop in. None of them cared about him, not really. To them, he was just a stepping stone. And there I was, tired, underpaid, by their standards, utterly unqualified, in their eyes, standing closer to him than anyone else dared. A pawn, maybe. Or maybe something they hadn't yet noticed, a player with a different kind of strength. The turning point came on an evening I'll never forget. The office was nearly empty, the city skyline glowing through the tall glass windows. I had stayed late to finish compiling quarterly reports, my eyes bleary from staring at spreadsheets. When I brought the folder into Mr. Spears' office, I expected the usual grunt of disapproval or another barrage of corrections. Instead, he gestured for me to sit, not across the desk, but beside him. The invitation alone startled me more than any criticism ever had. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze lingered on the photograph resting on his desk, a black and white image of a younger man standing proudly in front of the company's very first building. He tapped the frame gently with his finger. "This was taken the day we signed our first client," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. I didn't know what to say. He had never shared personal details before. But that night, the floodgates opened. He spoke of the early days, the sacrifices, the friendships lost along the way. He confessed the loneliness of leadership, that somewhere along the climb, the people who once believed in his vision had turned into people who only believed in his power. His eyes, usually sharp and guarded, looked weary. I once thought I had found the perfect successor, he admitted. A brilliant young executive, talented, loyal, or so I believed. But ambition devours loyalty faster than fire devours paper. She left, and with her, I suppose, went the last piece of me that trusted easily. He paused, turning toward me. "Do you know why I keep assistants for so short a time?" I shook my head. "Because they all want something. Access, influence, a stepping stone to the next title. None of them wanted to serve, they wanted to take." His eyes searched mine. "You're different. You stay. You work. You don't ask for anything." The weight of his words left me stunned. I had never thought of myself as anything more than an overworked assistant holding on by my fingernails. Yet here was the man who built an empire suggesting I was something else, something he hadn't found in decades. In the weeks that followed, our dynamic shifted. He no longer barked orders with the same venom. Instead, he began to share pieces of his past, fragments of advice that felt less like commands and more like lessons. I found myself listening, not just because it was my job, but because I realized there was wisdom behind his gruff exterior lessons about resilience, about trust, about the cost of power. Still, I never imagined it would go further than that. That's why when the lawyer announced my name at the company meeting, my world turned upside down. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, while the executives fought, while the board speculated, while the vultures circled. Theodore Spears had already chosen. He hadn't chosen brilliance. He hadn't chosen experience. He hadn't chosen the most ruthless strategist. He had chosen me. The chaos that followed the announcement was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The moment my name echoed through the conference room, the air split with disbelief. A few gasps turned into murmurs, then into open protests. Executives who had been smiling seconds earlier now scowled their polished confidence, unraveling into outrage. "This is absurd," the CFO thundered, his voice cracking with fury. "She's an assistant. She doesn't even sit at the management table." "Spears must have lost his mind," someone muttered, not quietly enough. I wanted to disappear into the carpet, but all eyes bore down on me. Heat rose in my cheeks, my heart pounded against my ribs. The lawyer raised his voice over the commotion. Mr. Spears anticipated these objections. He left explicit instructions, documents, recordings, everything validating his decision. The screen behind him flickered to life, and suddenly there was Mr. Spears. It was a video recorded only days before. His voice was gravelly but firm, his eyes unflinching. "You will not understand this choice." He began, his gaze boring into the camera as if into every soul in that room. But leadership is not about titles or decades served. It is about character. I have watched Julia Reynolds endure more trials in months than some of you have faced in years. And she has done so without ambition for herself, only commitment to the work. That is why I trust her to carry forward what this company was meant to be. The room fell into stunned silence. The weight of his words pressed down on everyone, even the loudest dissenters. The lawyer continued. "Additionally, Mr. Spears has left a personal letter for Miss Reynolds." My hands trembled as I accepted the sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front, sharp, deliberate strokes, was unmistakably his. I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the words that blurred as tears threatened to fall. "Julia, you may not believe you are ready. No one ever does. But readiness is not the measure of a leader, heart is. This company has enough intellect, enough strategy, enough greed. What it lacks is someone who remembers that people, not profit, are its true foundation. You have shown me that strength. You are my choice, not by accident, but by conviction." The lump in my throat grew as I folded the letter back into its envelope. Around me, the directors shifted in their seats, some begrudgingly silent, others still fuming, but unable to argue against the ironclad evidence. I had walked into that meeting as an invisible assistant. Now, in the space of minutes, I had become the focal point of an empire's future. And though fear rattled in my chest, another emotion flickered beneath it. Resolve. Because if Theodore Spears believed in me enough to stake his legacy on my name, then I owed it to him and to myself to rise to the challenge. The days that followed felt surreal, as though I had stepped into someone else's life. My ID badge still read executive assistant, yet suddenly directors who had once brushed past me in hallways were forced to acknowledge me. Some offered polite but hollow congratulations. Others couldn't hide their resentment. The board issued statements of support, but I could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for me to stumble. I knew I couldn't lead by pretending to be what I wasn't. I had no decades of corporate maneuvering, no MBA with embossed lettering. What I had was something Theodore Spears had valued above all, a belief that people mattered more than profits. And so my first acts as successor reflected that. We introduced an employee wellness initiative, counseling services, parental leave extensions, a modest but meaningful tuition reimbursement program. For years, these ideas had been dismissed as too costly, Yet the moment they were implemented, I saw a morale shift. The break rooms buzzed with cautious optimism. People began to look up when they passed one another in the hall. It was subtle, but unmistakable hope was returning. Then came the community programs. Spears had once told me in a rare moment of reflection that a company either feeds the city it inhabits or drains it dry. I couldn't forget that, so we launched a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in neighborhoods surrounding our headquarters. We partnered with local nonprofits to offer job training for those overlooked by traditional hiring practices. These weren't flashy initiatives meant to pad annual reports. They were tangible investments in people. Critics, of course, lined up to attack. "Idealism doesn't pay the bills," one executive sneered. "You'll bankrupt us with kindness." But I stood firm, guided by the letter Spears had left me. Slowly, numbers began to prove what cynics couldn't deny: productivity rose, turnover declined, and clients noticed the shift in culture. What had been dismissed as weakness was in truth strength. Through it all, I carried Theodore Spears' voice in my mind. Sometimes I imagined him still sitting behind his desk, watching with those piercing eyes, challenging me to be sharper, braver. Other times, I remembered the weary man who admitted he was tired of being surrounded by ambition without loyalty. And I promised myself I would never let the company he built slip back into that hollow cycle. Looking back, I realize now that the greatest inheritance he left me wasn't a title or a corner office. It was a lesson that legacies aren't measured by balance sheets or stock valuations, but by the humanity we cultivate within the walls of our institutions. I had begun this journey as a shadow in the room, a name no one bothered to remember. But standing at the helm now, I understood what Spears had seen in me: not perfection, not brilliance, but a refusal to abandon my humanity in the face of pressure. And perhaps that is the truest form of leadership: not rising above people, but rising with them.